I need to tell you something that will shake the very foundation of how you see yourself, your relationships, and your capacity for healing. What I'm about to share isn't comfortable. It isn't easy, but it is the truth that stands between you and the life you were meant to live. You will never fully heal until you face this about your mother. Not the mother you remember, not the mother you've idealized or demonized, but the mother who lives within you still, casting shadows across every choice you make, every relationship you enter, every dream you dare to pursue or abandon before it begins. I've spent years studying the depths of human psychology, diving into the sacred and terrifying terrain of the unconscious mind, and I've discovered something that changes everything. The greatest barrier to your healing isn't what happened to you, it's what you've never allowed yourself to see about what happened within you. Your mother didn't just raise you, she became you. Her voice became your inner voice. Her fears became your limitations. Her unlived dreams became your unconscious prison. And until you face this truth, until you meet her in the depths of your own psyche, you will remain trapped in patterns that feel like destiny but are actually inheritance. This is not about blame, this is about liberation. The mother I'm speaking of isn't the woman who gave birth to you. She is the archetypal force that shaped the architecture of your inner world before you had words to name what was happening. She is the first mirror in which you saw yourself, the first judge of your worth, the first teacher of what love means and what it costs. In the beginning, you were pure potential, a soul incarnating into form, open and receptive to the energies around you. You absorbed everything, her moods, her anxieties, her unspoken grief, her buried rage. You learned to read her face like a map of your own survival. When she smiled, you were safe. When she withdrew, you were in danger. When she needed you to be less, you became less. When she needed you to be more, you performed. But here's what no one tells you about this primal dance of survival and love. You didn't just learn to please her, you learned to become her. Her emotional patterns became your emotional patterns. Her coping mechanisms became your coping mechanisms. Her relationship with herself became the template for your relationship with yourself. If she rejected her own sensitivity, you learned to reject yours. If she sacrificed her dreams for duty, you learned that dreams are selfish. If she silenced her voice to keep peace, you learned that speaking truth is dangerous. If she abandoned herself to care for others, you learned that your needs don't matter. This is the invisible inheritance that runs deeper than DNA. It's the psychic imprint that shapes your reality from the shadows of your unconscious mind. And until you make this inheritance conscious, you will live her unlived life while thinking it's your own. I see this everywhere I look. Adults who shrink themselves to fit into relationships that mirror their childhood. People who sabotage their success the moment it threatens to exceed their mother's achievements. Individuals who feel guilty for choosing joy, as if happiness would be a betrayal of her suffering. You may think you've moved beyond her influence. You may live across the world or have limited contact. You may have done years of therapy or spiritual work. But if you haven't faced the mother who lives within you, you're still dancing to her unconscious rhythm. The internal mother isn't a memory. She's a living presence, an autonomous force within your psyche that speaks with the voice of absolute authority. She is the one who whispers, "Who do you think you are?" when you dare to dream big. She is the one who floods you with guilt when you set boundaries. She is the one who convinces you that your needs are too much, your voice is too loud, your very existence is somehow wrong. This voice has been with you so long that you mistake it for your own inner wisdom. You think it's keeping you safe, keeping you humble, keeping you loved, but it's not your voice, it's hers. And it's time to recognize the difference. I remember the moment I first understood this truth in my own life. I was sitting in meditation, trying to understand why I felt so paralyzed every time an opportunity for expansion appeared, why success felt dangerous, why joy felt like betrayal, and suddenly I heard it clearly. My mother's voice speaking through my own thoughts, warning me not to get too big, not to shine too bright, not to leave her behind in my ascension. In that moment, I realized I had been living two lives simultaneously, my own and hers. I had been carrying her fears as if they were my intuition, her limitations as if they were my boundaries, her unlived pain as if it were my responsibility to heal. This is the burden that I called the unlived life of the parent. It's the heaviest weight a soul can carry because it's invisible, unacknowledged, and often mistaken for love. But it's not love. It's unconscious entanglement, and it will kill your dreams if you don't learn to see it for what it is. The mother within you operates from a place of profound fear. She fears your independence because it threatens her sense of purpose. She fears your success because it illuminates her own unrealized potential. She fears your authenticity because it exposes the masks she wore to survive. She fears your healing because it would mean acknowledging the wounds she inflicted. But here's the crucial understanding. This fear isn't evil. It's human. It's the fear of a woman who is likely wounded herself, who was probably carrying the unlived life of her own mother, who was possibly doing the best she could with the consciousness she had. This recognition doesn't excuse harmful behavior. It doesn't mean you should tolerate abuse or sacrifice your well-being for her comfort. But it does mean you can meet her with something more powerful than anger or resentment. You can meet her with clarity. When you truly see the mother within, not as a villain to defeat, but as a wounded part of your own psyche to integrate, something profound shifts. The spell begins to break. The unconscious loyalty begins to dissolve. The inherited patterns begin to loosen their grip. But this seeing requires courage that most people never summon. It requires you to feel the full weight of what you absorbed from her. The anxiety that became your anxiety, the depression that became your depression, the self-doubt that became your inner critic, the rage that became your self-destruction. You have to feel it all without judgment, without the need to fix or change anything. You have to witness the child within you who took it all on, who believed it was their job to heal her, to complete her, to live for her instead of themselves. This witnessing is sacred work. It's the work of reclaiming your own soul from the gravitational pull of her unlived life. It's the work of separating what is yours from what is hers. It's the work of becoming who you actually are instead of who she needed you to be. I won't lie to you. This process feels like death before it feels like freedom. When you begin to separate from the internal mother, when you start to question her voice and claim your own, there's often a period of profound disorientation. The old identity crumbles. The familiar patterns no longer work. You may feel lost, guilty, or afraid. This is normal. This is necessary. This is the birth canal of your authentic self. In the depths of this process, you may encounter what I call the devouring mother, the archetypal force that seeks to pull you back into unconsciousness, back into the familiar prison of inherited limitation. She appears in dreams as the witch, the dragon, the siren calling you back to sleep. In waking life, she manifests as the voice that says you're being selfish when you prioritize your needs. You're being ungrateful when you speak your truth. You're going to end up alone when you refuse to betray yourself for love. This voice will get louder before it gets quieter. It will pull out every weapon in its arsenal to maintain control. Guilt, shame, fear, obligation, all will rise to the surface as you begin to claim your sovereignty. But here's what I need you to understand. This intensification is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something right. It's the death throes of a pattern that has outlived its purpose. It's the internal mother's last attempt to maintain her dominion over your soul. Stand firm. Breathe through it. Remember that you are not rejecting your mother as a person. You are reclaiming yourself from her unlived life. You are not being cruel. You are being born. As you move through this process, you'll begin to notice subtle shifts. The voice of the internal mother will start to lose its hypnotic power. You'll catch yourself mid-thought and realize that's not my voice, that's hers. You'll feel the pull of old patterns and choose differently. You'll recognize her emotional triggers within you and refuse to be controlled by them. This is integration beginning. This is consciousness dawning. This is your authentic self emerging from the cocoon of unconscious inheritance. But the work doesn't end with recognition. It deepens with reclamation. You must actively choose to reparent yourself, to become the mother your soul always needed. You must learn to speak to yourself with the kindness she may not have been able to offer. You must learn to validate your feelings, meet your needs, and honor your dreams without her permission. This reparenting isn't about perfection, it's about presence. It's about showing up for yourself in the moments when you're triggered, scared, or uncertain. It's about offering yourself the patience, understanding, and unconditional love that every soul deserves. As you develop this relationship with yourself, something beautiful begins to happen. The desperate seeking for external validation starts to quiet. The compulsive need to please others begins to fade. The fear of abandonment loses its grip because you're no longer abandoning yourself. You begin to trust your own judgment. You begin to honor your own rhythm rhythms. You begin to live from your own center instead of orbiting around other people's needs and expectations. This is what I called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are instead of who you were conditioned to be. It's the sacred journey from unconscious inheritance to conscious creation. It's the path from survival to authenticity. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of this healing is what it offers to future generations. When you break the cycle of unconscious inheritance, when you refuse to pass on the unlived life you received, you become what I call a conscious ancestor. You become the one who stops the pattern, the one who says, this ends with me, the one who chooses to heal instead of perpetrate, to love instead of control, to free instead of bind. Your children, if you have them, will not carry your unlived life as their burden. Your relationships will not be unconscious reenactments of your childhood wounds. Your creativity will not be stifled by inherited fears. Your success will not be sabotaged by ancestral guilt. This is the gift that healing offers, not just to you, but to all those whose lives you touch. Every person you encounter will feel the difference. They will sense that they are in the presence of someone who is not unconsciously bleeding their wounds onto others, someone who is not seeking to complete themselves through external relationships. They will feel safe with you because you have learned to be safe with yourself. They will feel seen by you because you have learned to see yourself clearly. They will feel free around you because you have claimed your own freedom. This is the ripple effect of facing the mother within. This is why this work matters beyond your personal healing. This is why the courage to confront your unconscious inheritance is not just a gift to yourself, it's a gift to the world. I know this path is not easy. I know it requires you to feel things you've spent a lifetime avoiding, to question beliefs you've held as sacred, to release identities you've worn as armor. I know it asks you to stand alone in your truth even when everyone around you is still asleep in their unconscious patterns. But I also know this: on the other side of this confrontation lies a freedom so profound, so authentic, so deeply rooted in truth that it will transform everything you touch. You will no longer live as an echo of someone else's unlived life. You will live as the full expression of your own soul's purpose. The mother within you will always be there. She is part of your psychic architecture, but she will no longer be your master. She will be a voice among many, not the voice of absolute authority. You will be able to listen to her concerns without being controlled by her fears. You will be able to honor her legacy without being imprisoned by her limitations. This is what conscious relationship looks like, not the elimination of influence, but the transformation of unconscious control into conscious choice. Not the rejection of your origins, but the integration of your inheritance in service of your authentic expression. The journey begins with a single recognition. The voice you think is yours may not be yours at all. The fears you think are protecting you may be inherited limitations. The beliefs you think are truth may be unconscious programming. Question everything, feel everything, reclaim everything that is truly yours, and release everything that belongs to someone else's unlived story. Your mother gave you life. Now it's time to give yourself the life she couldn't give you, the life of complete authenticity, unbounded creativity, and unconditional self-love. The pen is in your hand, the story is yours to write, and the mother within is ready to be transformed from warden into witness, from controller into companion, on the sacred journey of becoming who you were always meant to be. This is your invitation. This is your calling. This is your time. Will you accept it? The choice, as always, is yours. But know this: your soul has been waiting lifetimes for this moment of recognition, this opportunity for liberation, this chance to finally, truly, completely come home to itself. But let me go deeper into what this confrontation actually looks like, because understanding the theory is only the beginning. Living the transformation requires you to descend into territories of the psyche that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. When I first began this work in my own life, I thought I understood what it meant to face the mother within. I had read the books, done the therapy, meditated on forgiveness. I believed I had processed my childhood, made peace with the past, moved beyond old wounds. I was wrong. The real work began when I stopped trying to heal the relationship with my outer mother and started examining the relationship with the mother who lived in my thoughts, my reactions, my automatic responses to life. This internal figure was far more complex and influential than I had ever imagined. She wasn't just a collection of memories or learned behaviors. She was a living, breathing presence within my psyche. complete with her own agenda, her own fears, her own desperate attempts to maintain control. She had opinions about my relationships, my career choices, my spiritual path. She had strategies for keeping me safe that felt like wisdom, but were actually prison walls built from inherited anxiety. I began to notice her everywhere, in the way I apologized for taking up space, in the way I minimized my achievements to make others comfortable, in the way I automatically assumed I was too much, too intense, too demanding whenever conflict arose, in the way I sacrificed my authentic expression to maintain the illusion of being a good person. These weren't just habits I had picked up, these were survival strategies I had absorbed from watching her navigate her own unlived life. She had taught me through her silence that speaking truth was dangerous. She had taught me through her self-sacrifice that my needs didn't matter. She had taught me through her anxiety that the world was fundamentally unsafe and I needed to stay small to survive. But here's what I discovered in the depths of this exploration. She wasn't teaching me these things consciously. She was drowning in her own unlived life, and I was unconsciously trying to save her by taking on her emotional burden as my own. This is the hidden tragedy of the mother-child dynamic that no one talks about. The child doesn't just absorb the mother's love, they absorb her pain, her fear, her unprocessed trauma, her unlived dreams. They carry these as if they were their own emotional reality, never knowing where the mother ends and they begin. I started paying attention to the moments when her voice would surface most strongly. It happened whenever I was about to take a risk, whenever success felt too close, whenever I was on the verge of expressing something authentic that might threaten the status quo. In those moments, her voice would rise with urgent warnings. Don't get too big for your britches. People won't like you if you're too successful. You're being selfish. You're going to hurt someone. These warnings felt like intuition. They felt like wisdom. They felt like the voice of my own inner guidance. But they weren't. They were the voice of her unlived life, desperately trying to keep me small enough that her own limitations wouldn't be exposed by contrast. This recognition was devastating and liberating simultaneously. Devastating because it meant I had been living someone else's life without knowing it. Liberating because it meant I could choose differently. The process of separation began with learning to distinguish between my authentic inner voice and her inherited programming. This required developing what I call psychic literacy, the ability to read the emotional signature of different internal voices and trace them back to their true source. My authentic voice spoke in whispers of possibility. It encouraged growth, celebrated uniqueness, supported risk-taking in service of truth. It was patient, curious, and inherently trusting of life's unfolding. It didn't argue or defend. It simply knew. Her voice spoke in commands and warnings. It was loud, urgent, and fear-based. It used guilt as a weapon and shame as a control mechanism. It was always trying to convince me of something, always fighting against some imagined threat, always preparing for disaster. Learning to tell these voices apart was like learning a new language. At first, it was clumsy and uncertain. I would catch myself mid-thought and wonder, is this me or is this her? But gradually, the distinction became clearer. The authentic voice felt expansive in my body. Her voice felt contractive, heavy, dense with old pain. As I developed this discernment, I began to understand the full scope of her influence. She wasn't just affecting my major life decisions, she was shaping my moment-to-moment experience of reality, the way I walked through the world, the way I related to my own reflection in the mirror, the way I interpreted other people's responses to me. All of it was filtered through her unhealed wounds. I realized that I had never actually met myself as I truly was. I had only ever met myself as she needed me to be for her own psychological survival. This was perhaps the most profound recognition of all. I was a stranger to myself, living as an unconscious servant to someone else's unlived life. The work of reclamation began with what I call archetypal archaeology, digging through the layers of inherited identity to discover what lay beneath. Who was I before I learned to be who she needed me to be? What were my natural rhythms before I adapted to hers? What were my authentic desires before I learned to want what was safe, appropriate, or acceptable? These questions led me into the deepest territories of the unconscious, where the original self lives in exile, waiting to be remembered and reclaimed. This original self wasn't wounded or defended. It wasn't afraid of being too much or not enough. It simply was pure potential, pure authenticity, pure creative force. But accessing this original self required me to traverse, I call it like the dark night of the soul, a period of profound disintegration where all familiar reference points dissolve. During this phase, I lost my sense of identity almost entirely. I didn't know who I was, what I wanted, or how to make decisions without her voice guiding me. This disintegration was terrifying and necessary. It was the psychological equivalent of a snake shedding its skin, a messy, vulnerable process that leaves you temporarily exposed while the new form emerges. I had to learn to tolerate the anxiety of not knowing who I was while trusting that something authentic would emerge from the confusion. In this liminal space, I encountered what shamanic traditions call the void, the fertile darkness from which all new life emerges. It was here, in the absence of inherited identity, that I began to sense the stirrings of my authentic self, not the self she had shaped, but the self that had been waiting patiently beneath the surface all along. This emergence didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, tentative, like a wild animal learning to trust after years of captivity. My authentic self had been in hiding for so long that it needed to be coaxed out with extreme patience and gentleness. It needed to know that it was safe to express itself, safe to be seen, safe to take up space in the world. I learned to speak to this emerging self the way I wished she had spoken to me, with unconditional love, infinite patience, and genuine curiosity about who I was becoming. I became my own good mother, offering the nurturing presence that had been missing from my development. This reparenting wasn't just emotional, it was somatic, spiritual, and creative. I had to learn to trust my body's wisdom instead of overriding it with mental control. I had to learn to follow my creative impulses instead of censoring them before they could emerge. I had to learn to honor my spiritual longings instead of dismissing them as impractical or self-indulgent. Each act of self-honoring was an act of rebellion against her unlived life. Each moment of authentic expression was a declaration of independence from inherited limitation. Each choice made from my own center was a step toward the sovereignty that had always been my birthright. But the internal mother didn't release her grip without a fight. As I began to live more authentically, her voice became more desperate, more manipulative, more insistent. She pulled out every weapon in her psychological arsenal: guilt about being selfish, fear about being rejected, shame about being different, anxiety about unknown consequences. These attacks were relentless and sophisticated. She knew exactly how to trigger my deepest vulnerabilities, exactly which fears would make me contract back into old patterns of compliance and self-betrayal. She was fighting for her psychological life, and she wasn't going to surrender without a battle. This is the phase that breaks most people. This is where many turn back, convinced that the discomfort of authenticity isn't worth the price of freedom. The old patterns start to look safe again. The familiar prison starts to feel like home. The inherited life starts to seem like the easier path. But I had tasted something in that void that I couldn't forget, the essence of who I actually was beneath all the conditioning. That taste was enough to sustain me through the fiercest storms of internal resistance. I knew that no amount of comfort was worth betraying the truth of my own soul. The breakthrough came when I stopped trying to silence her voice and instead learned to respond to it from my adult consciousness. When she would whisper her familiar warnings about taking up too much space, I would acknowledge her concern with compassion while making choices from my own wisdom. When she would flood me with guilt for prioritizing my needs, I would thank her for her worry while maintaining my boundaries. This shift from fighting her to responding to her consciously changed everything. She stopped being an enemy to defeat and became a wounded part of my psyche to heal. I could see her fear, her pain, her desperate attempts to keep us both safe in the only way she knew how. I could have compassion for her limitations without being controlled by them. This compassionate response began to transform our relationship. She started to trust that I could take care of both of us in ways that she had never been able to manage alone. Her voice became less desperate, less controlling, less afraid. She began to offer her wisdom as guidance rather than demanding it as law. But perhaps the most profound transformation was in how I began to show up in the world. No longer carrying the weight of her unlived life, I felt lighter, clearer, more present. My relationships became more authentic because I was no longer seeking to complete myself through others. My work became more inspired because it was flowing from my true gifts rather than from compensatory patterns. People began to respond to me differently. They could sense that they were encountering someone who wasn't desperately seeking their approval, someone who wasn't trying to manage their emotions or fix their problems. They felt safe to be themselves around me because I had learned to be myself around me. This ripple effect extended far beyond my personal life. Every interaction became an opportunity to model what it looks like to live from authentic selfhood rather than inherited programming. Every conversation became a chance to offer others the permission I had learned to give myself, the permission to be real, to be flawed, to be gloriously, unapologetically human. The work continues. It's not a destination but a practice, not an achievement but a way of being. Every day brings new opportunities to choose my authentic voice over her inherited programming, to trust my own wisdom over her familiar fears, to live my own life rather than the echo of hers. And every day I'm amazed by the depth of freedom that comes from this simple but revolutionary act, refusing to live someone else's unlived life and instead claiming the magnificent responsibility of living my own. This is what awaits you on the other side of this confrontation. Not perfection, but authenticity. Not the absence of challenges, but the presence of your own power to meet them. Not the elimination of your mother's influence, but the transformation of that influence from unconscious control to conscious choice. The mother within you is waiting. She has been waiting your entire life for you to be strong enough, conscious enough, loving enough to meet her with the truth that will set you both free. She doesn't need your hatred or your fear. She needs your recognition, your compassion, and your unwavering commitment to living the life that is authentically yours. Don't keep it waiting any longer. The next step in your healing journey awaits. Subscribe to continue exploring the depths of consciousness, the mysteries of the psyche, and the tools for authentic transformation. Turn on notifications so you never miss the insights that could change everything. Your authentic self is waiting. Your sovereign life is calling. And the pen is finally in your hand to write the story you were always meant to live.